Hello and welcome to the Metapod Podcast, the Pokemon TCG podcast that revolves around the evolving meta. Look at a little bit different of an area for me, for all of our video listeners. But Sean, how are you doing? How has your last couple days have been since we last recorded?
They've been good. They've been good. We're doing the last two, this one and the one previous, a little close together because Jake is off on some adventures soon.
Yeah, I usually travel home every summer. Long listeners of the last 5 years know that this is kind of the time that I like go home for 2 weeks to help out my mom with like some stuff that she does for work. Um, so that's coming up. So we're recording this early because it's one of those things that you can record a little bit earlier.
I will also say though, Jake, tell people where you're at because you did mention it's a new space, but what's going on?
So we are in the works officially of a new studio space over at a new card store in Las Vegas for all the Las Vegas locals out here. If you stop by Tier 1 card games, over on kind of North Summerlin area, if you're on the north side, they've got Pokemon singles, they've got a One Piece, which is mainly what I'm here for, but will be everything else in between. And I will be probably at a point, probably not until I come back, but regularly, like all the time, making content here. So just threw in this microphone and camera. We're still getting all the equipment and everything set up and ready to go. And there'll be beautiful stuff behind me. So it's not just a white wall. But for the time being, this was just really nice because this is a quiet space. I'm here before the store opens, so nobody else is here but us.
Yeah, I was gonna say we got to get you some Pokemon art or something in the
I
background.
will say, like, we are getting shelving to put in the to put on the walls, and like I'll put in some of my like sealed product booster boxes to display and some cool cards that I have, the graded cards and stuff like that. The audio listeners, you'll never know. It'll be up for your imagination
Yeah, I
on
love
what
it.
it is. But yeah, tier 1 will officially be sponsoring me, and I'll be here kind of full time as well. And so anytime, and this I guess this is a good plug. We're going to be talking about ranking our Destined Rivals format decks, right? What we think is going to be good, what we think is going to be bait, what decks are viable, stuff like that. So if you need any singles to be able to build any of those decks in Destined Rivals or in future sets beyond, the store's just getting started. So over time, more product and more singles will come about. They do have a little link of their store where you can buy singles and stuff. So, and then if you're local in Vegas, obviously come check us out. But anyways, that's enough of the plug, Sean.
No, it's
But
good.
yeah,
Jake, you've embarked on the full-time content creator route, and so I think
yeah.
myself and listeners can appreciate that. You know, supporting the people that support you is a great way to support you. So
Yeah,
that's what
and
matters.
I mean, just like kind of you are with your local stores, we'll be streaming like our cups and challenges, especially in terms of the Pokemon space. So more Pokemon content for the Metapod, which unfortunately for the audio only listeners on like Spotify and Apple, you won't be able to see the cups and challenges. But if you head over to the official YouTube channel, link in the show notes description below and whatnot, there will be more of that. So it's still growing because this store just did open up like on Saturday, this past Saturday. So as at the time of Sean and I recording, it's only been open a couple days, not even a week yet.
Yeah.
So still plenty of stuff to go in, and I know these guys will be successful because I know them. So it'll be fun. It'll be a lot of fun. I'm excited for what's to come.
Well, Jake, are you ready to dive just right into it? So, we for the listeners, NAIC, when this comes out, NAIC will be the weekend of this coming out, I believe.
Yes, correct. Just a couple
Um,
days.
yeah, happening in New Orleans. Neither Jake nor I will be there this year. So, have if you are going, have a wonderful time out there in the heat. Fingers crossed that you do better than I did last year. But we're gonna be talking about like ranking the decks. We'll see how wrong we were, and And, you can then hassle us later.
We've had some good meta calls in the last couple of formats, right?
Yeah.
So I don't think it'll be that bad.
No, probably not too bad. But I mean, yeah, Jake, where do you want to start? I pulled up the tier list now. You also have access to it. But what deck do you want to
So
start with?
we've got access to probably around like 15 different archetypes in this, and it doesn't have every single archetype that you can come across, but it does have a wide enough variety that I think. And please let us know as well in the comments or in our official Discord server if we missed anything. And then we'll let you know our opinions in those various mediums of what we think it is. But I think the first one that you can start out with is the Frostlass that you have in there. Just put it in
Oh,
D. I think it's bad.
you think that the Frostlass, Maractus, Monkey Dory,
So
like trap deck?
I think you should only play it if you have the Grimmsnarl in there. I think Grimmsnarl is a huge enabler in the deck. I don't think the deck by itself really does too much. I think it's just a little bit too slow, while Grimmsnarl like kind of accelerates the game plan.
I will say this. I agree that Frostlass, because I put this in there, and for those of you who are listening can't necessarily see, there's just a picture of a Frostlass card. I put that as a representation of the single prize style, like Maractus,
Mhm.
Frostlass, Badoo, Monkey Dory deck, which is really like it's all about trapping your opponent in the active with Maractus, item locking your opponent early, building up damage counters, and then moving some damage counters with Monkey Dory. Um, I'm gonna fight for this one, Jake. I do not think this is
Okay.
a D tier deck. I don't know if it might be bait in that like if you bring this to NAIC, I don't know how successful it will be into day 2, but I don't think the deck is bad, which is like for me like D tier is just like I don't know, like at our challenge, right? I went 4-0. My last round was against the other person who was 3-0 who was playing this deck. Now, granted, Marnie's Grimmsnarl was not in the format at the time. And
Mhm.
yes, Marnie's Grimmsnarl, I think, makes better use of Frostlass and Monkey Dory. But I don't know. Like, I think that this deck has a lot of ways. Like, people aren't playing Switch. We've been saying it for months now. I think that this deck can really surprise people, especially people who are not familiar with like how to play against it. I don't know. Those are my thoughts. We put it in B tier. I don't think it is winning the tournament. I don't think that I don't even really think that more than like one or two of them will make day 2. But
Counterpoint then to your counterpoint.
yeah,
So if you think nobody's expecting Maractus Frostlass kind of trap style, right? Grimmsnarl effectively does that same thing. And Grimmsnarl, spoiler alert, we're going to put it
oh yeah,
decently high, right, on the tier list. And it's a deck that a lot of people are talking about. You know, you're looking at the online results. So decks are then building around to prepare for that. And so now they're prepared for the trap, the Maractus, right?
I
They're
mean,
because Grimmsnarl does play Maractus and Grimmsnarl does use that strategy. So it's like there's inherently now more decks that are ready for it and can counter it. So why not just play a deck that does what that deck wants to do, but faster, you know?
no, I would agree with you. I think that the top tier players will choose Grimmsnarl over Frostlass. I don't know if I would call Grimmsnarl a trap deck because it plays one Maractus and it's a situational Maractus. I think the deck typically wants to attack with Grimmsnarl.
Mhm.
So I don't know if people are throwing in a bunch of switch cards for Grimmsnarl. Like, I just I don't see that happening. I think people are gonna play like the basic decks are gonna play Latias. Maybe they'll play a Prime Catcher if they're hyper aggressive. Um, Gardevoir might play a Professor Turo scenario.
Oh, they always
Outside of
have,
that,
though.
yeah, exactly. That's one. But outside of that, I don't really see. But I will say, Gardevoir absolutely bodies this deck. Just to be frank, I played against it. I even played I played the Frostlass deck against my own Gardevoir, somebody else playing it. I definitely knew the strategy, and I couldn't beat my own Gardevoir with it. And I was just like, yeah, this deck, the Monkey Wars, you lose the Monkey Wars. But I don't know. Can we put it at C tier? I do not think it is D tier.
I'll put it in C tier and concede to the fact of, like, because we constantly talk about no switches in format.
Yeah.
People really, especially now that Secret Box has become so much more prevalent in decks, right? That's less room for Prime Catcher, right, to be able to do switch outs and things like that. So I will concede in C tier, but as soon as it becomes D tier, I will say I told you so.
I mean, maybe, I don't know. We'll see how this goes. I think the deck is like a really good deck for locals, but I don't think it is a good deck for NAIC. Also because
I would agree with that.
I think you'll lose game one. If you lose game one, you're not winning a 3-game set with this deck. It just takes way too long. So I've always been a proponent of, like, in a best of 3 format, you need to have a deck that will 80 or 90% of the time win game one if you're going to play a slow deck. Otherwise, don't play that deck. So
yeah.
Let's switch over to let's talk about Marnie's Grimmsnarl. Let's set the bar, and then we can go from there. I mean, I'm just gonna say I don't think we have an S tier format, but I think Marnie's Grimmsnarl is an A tier deck.
I would agree with that. I think Marnie's Grimmsnarl is a pretty good deck, right? I think it's very valuable, especially when Gardevoir is so prevalent, right? Just being able to smack Gardevoir is so valuable, right? Do that one shot and be able to set up more damage. Especially when you talk about, like you said, like Frostlass, Monkey Dory combos, you can set up multiple knockouts, things of that nature, and constantly spreading out damage. I like it. It's not an insane deck, but especially when your weakness is grass and there's not too much grass in format to be able to hit you, and stuff like that. So really all that you're being one hit KO'd is like Raging Bolt, and even then they still have to get so many energies out, which could be a problem at times. I think especially at the Full Grip 3K, was a really good showcase of why the deck is actually legit. Because I do think it was a deck on a lot of people's radars heading into that event as well. And so I see Marnie's Grimmsnarl being the top partner Pokemon deck of the format, right? Of these, like, Trainers X Pokemon.
Yeah.
I think it's definitely the top dog in that category.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. It's a really strong deck. I think even with Shaman in format, where it's like, oh, you can stop the 30 damage being placed onto non-rule box Pokemon, like, that's wonderful and all, but, like, between Frostlass and Monkey Dory, it kind of doesn't matter. Like, like, you could even focus down the Shamans.
Like, you're asking your opponent to also run Monkey Dory. Like, they have to run Monkey Dory in that situation, or else it's down like flies.
Yeah. So I think that's a solid A tier. I think we can start going through the rest of the list then, which is, let's start with one that I think has done very well for a while, but for whatever reason, the last, like, 2 months or so, or month, I haven't really seen a lot of it, which is Goldengo. Like, nobody's been talking about where Goldengo lives in this Destined Rivals format. Jake, does it have a home for you anywhere? Is it good still?
I think that Goldengo's a little weird to me, and I would put it in the B tier. I still think it's a fine deck, but I think just the way that a lot of people are playing it, it's just with Dragapult, right? But it's with these other partners, to where your game plan is not always Goldengo, right? It's not as much anymore just straight up string cheese. And I think that kind of is a reason why the deck has just fallen off as a whole. And where it's not as strong, because you have so many other hard-hitting decks, right? Especially with the Grim, like, I'm just going to talk about the Grimmsnarl. Then your Gimmighouls, not very small, so you have to evolve them right away. And if you don't, they get sniped immediately. It's not actually that hard, I feel like, for Grimmsnarl to set up knockouts with it to kind of put in that prize exchange. And especially when you talk about how Goldengo would force kind of an awkward prize exchange with that like one prize dango, right? To make you kind of offset. Grimmsnarl is one of those decks that gets around it in a sense. And so I think just having like that be probably kind of a tough matchup, being able to really set up knockouts easily with that 260 HP stat line with stacking up, and then Monkey Dory, and then the Grimmsnarl spreading out damage. You've got Gardevoir that can just one hit knockout on you. Um, it's just 260 is not as awkward of a number anymore. With kind of the decks that have moved around. And so I think it kind of hurts because honestly, there might be a better one-shot deck, I'll get to it later, that you could play in the format.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that Goldengo was great as a one-shot deck prior, but weirdly, I think we've almost moved away from a one-shot format where the decks
Mhm.
that are doing well and winning are decks that set up for multi KO turns, whether that's Gardevoir or Marnie's Grimmsnarl or, the Frostlass deck. So Goldengo does feel quite linear, but it doesn't get like extra prizes like Joltik Box or whatever either. So it's just kind of, it's a little too straightforward maybe.
Mhm.
I guess moving on then, I mentioned the Joltik Box deck. I think one of the most popular decks of the last format. Does this deck stay near the top, or does the deck fall off hard?
This is a tough one for me. I was hoping that we wouldn't do Joltik Box so early so that I could think about it more. Joltik Box is one of those weird decks to me that's like consistent, but with the small Joltiks, it's tough. And then with all of the damage counter manipulation, right? Like your Pikachus don't last as long, right? With that Resolute Heart ability. How far can Iron Hands carry you, right? As you accelerate energies onto that. It's still a good deck, don't get me wrong. And a lot of people really like the idea of it. But is its limelight been around too long that now people have just built around and beat it just because they know what it is, right? It's not like Gardevoir that like even if you do know, it's still like a top dog. Um, but over time it just gets worse and worse.
It's interesting. I think that weirdly, I start to think that the Pikachu that's in Joltik Box, does the Pikachu become more and more irrelevant the more Monkey Dory exists?
I don't know if it's I don't know if it becomes irrelevant. Um, but it definitely becomes it's really just sat in like a 2 of, I feel like,
Yeah,
in this format because it's still really strong, right? Being able to hit 300, you're able with Crispin, right,
sure.
in your deck to be able to get those awkward energies around. You've run the Galvantula, which we talked about on the podcast last week, how it one-shots a Grimmsnarl, right?
Yeah.
Because of that ability of Compound Eyes. So,
Also the Iron
um,
Leaves. You could run Iron Leaves
yeah,
in the
the
deck.
you can run Iron Leaves if you have enough of those grass energies. So there's a lot of different options for the deck, and it's had a pretty good run. And even in uh, Bologna, how do you pronounce that?
The one in Italy.
Yeah, the one in Italy, having a really good showing. Daniel Rinaldi getting 5th place overall with the deck. So I still think it's in a pretty decent spot because I don't know if Destined Rivals format changes it too much. But it really hovers for me between like A and B. I think I would probably go more safe and put it in A.
In A?
Yeah, I think it's still a pretty decent deck.
Okay. I mean, I'll put it in A for now. We can move stuff around if we want later. But what deck do you want to talk about next, Jake?
I will say, let me go on with Typhlosion, right? This is my hyped deck of the format. I put it in B. I think it's a good deck. I think it's a fun deck, and I think it's probably the best pure single prize deck that you've got in there. Because even and when I say like pure single prize, I'm talking about attacking single prizes.
Yeah.
Like I know you can pair it with Dragapult. I know you can pair it with Pidgeot, that we talked about last week and showcase that list. But as a whole, just as an attacker, being a single prize, I think it's the best out there. But I don't I don't know if it reaches the same level that I would put like Grimmsnarl or Joltik box. It's probably decently close to Joltik box. Like it's in the conversation. But I think it's too linear in
Mm-hmm.
a sense, where a lot of these other decks have manipulation and things like that, where your whole game plan is just stuff Ethan's adventure in the discard pile and then hit nice numbers, and stack up damage and feed. But although 170 is a really good number, I feel like in the format right now, it's like not too low, but it's not overly high.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting. I don't know the matchup with something like a Marnie's Grimmsnarl or Gardevoir, but it I'll be interested to see if it gets a lot of play, like how they play into those matchups, because I agree, you can theoretically force your opponent into taking 6 knockouts, which
Mm.
is pretty annoying. And if you're Marnie's Grimmsnarl, like you can't necessarily afford to swing 6 times. You might, lose all your prizes. But between Frostlass and Monkey Dory, because the Quilava has an ability, the Monkey Dory can move counters. I think that, oftentimes a Marnie's Grimmsnarl player might be able to take multiple knockouts on like 2 potential Typhlosions at once, and then it sets you back, and all of a sudden you can't go anywhere.
And I think to that point too, it's not just Marnie's Grimmsnarl deck. It's really any deck that plays Monkey Dory,
Yeah,
which is a
Monkey's
lot
crazy.
in the format. Yeah, like I think to your point, like you have to evolve quickly with the deck. You either have to sit at Cyndaquil or you have to go
Rare candy into
into
Typhlosion.
Typhlosion, right? And you could take a little bit of time, right? Because to utilize Quilava's ability to get all these things out of the deck that you need, the Ethan's adventure and stuff like that. But especially when we talk about like hand disruption as well, how big of hand disruption does factor into Typhlosion's success, right? We even showed a list last week that was playing Judge,
Yeah.
right? So is Judge becoming more prevalent in the format? Is Iono still prevalent in the format?
Yeah.
But you would have to think that that hinders a little bit of the success, and one of the reasons why they run Pidgeot, right? To be able to counter against that hand disruption, but that now means you have a 2 prize liability in place. So it's like a weird thing, and I would still take Typhlosion. I still think if you want to play it at like NAIC, it's still a decent call. Like it's still a good deck that you can play. But if you're trying to figure out like the best play for NAIC, the best deck for that event, I don't know if Typhlosion's it, but it's still like a good one.
Let's go into some of the less popular picks, maybe. We had one
Mhm.
that sort of burst onto the scene last couple of weeks, Toadstool. Both the EX and the baby in the deck. My question for you, Jake, is does this, it is a grass type, so it's good against Marnie's Grimmsnarl in theory.
Mhm.
Does this card, though, does this deck keep momentum into NAIC, or was it like a flash in the pan?
I don't. I think it does catch more momentum inherently. Like, I mean, if Ray Chen never put out their deck list public, because I think it was it top 16,
Might have been.
not top cut,
Yeah.
right? And if Ray Chen never put out their deck list, I feel like this deck would be much less popular. But because they did, but I don't think that Toad feels like one of those decks where you have like new first time formats like NAIC is going to be, where it can be successful because nobody will expect Toad Scroll.
Hmm.
People now have to somewhat respect Toad Scroll, especially if you're like a Marnie's Grimmsnarl deck, right? You have to be much more careful with your resources. You need to be careful how you're hitting and where you're putting damage and things like that. I would, because Toad Scroll also has to evolve. I don't know how high. I wanted to put it in C, which is why I wanted to put Frostlass in D, because I think it's better than Frostlass and I think it's much better. Um, but I don't think I'd put it in the same category as like Typhlosion or Goldengo or some of the other decks that I want to put in B.
Yeah, I think the Toad Scroll deck definitely is a deck where it might have a couple of good matchups, but then it'll have a bunch of matchups that are really awkward.
Mhm.
Like, where maybe the abilities of your Toad Scrolls don't really come into play that much. and all of a sudden you're not doing quite the same amount of damage, or you don't have the same game plan that they do. So I think putting it at C with Frostlass is fine because I do think both of the decks are a little situational in how good they are in a format. So
Hmm.
another deck here that I think was really successful, maybe before Journey Together, and fell off again quite a bit in the last couple months, which is Archaladon. Um, not really sure. Honestly, I'm going to give my honest opinion here.
Hmm.
I don't see Archaladon. Like, what was the recent version? It's Archaladon and what else? Who?
Well, you could just do like a more straight Archaladon, right? Where it's kind
Mhm.
of just Archaladon, Pheasantipity, and you've got your setup pieces like Squawkabilly,
Yeah.
stuff like that. Maybe some extra attackers in Blood Moon Ursaluna. Or you could go in that Brute Bonnet Petrarun package. I think the poison package was the most popular in the last several weeks. But you could just go without the poison package.
I don't know.
You could donk or you could not donk.
I guess I'm just thinking about it, right? And the success that Archaladon saw before was that it was a big Pokemon that did decent damage, that was hard to knock out in response.
Hmm.
And I think that it's not untrue. Like, that's still kind of our format. So in theory, all the pieces for that recipe for success are there. But with so much Monkey Dory being out there, your opponent could theoretically, you know, do some setup on Duraludons, you know, then move some more damage onto the Archaladons after you evolved it and take those knockouts before you get the chance to Professor Turo scenario. And so I don't know. I don't. It's a tough one. Part of me wants to put it in D, just because I think that Archaladon. I don't really see its purpose in this format, because I think
Hmm.
a big body that's hard to KO, like Marnie's Grimmsnarl, is a big body that's hard to KO, and it's just a better deck. It's different. It's very different. But
But you get the energies from deck rather than discard pile
so it's
upon
more
the
consistent.
evolution.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you have more ways to search for the evolution to be able to get that off. Even you don't even have to have rare candy
No.
because of TM Evo. So
So I don't know. It's kind of a funky one where I'm like, I don't know I don't think many people will play it. So that's why I'm going to put it at
yeah,
D. But like, you tell me if I should move it elsewhere.
I feel like C because we put Frostlass in C,
You
but
really,
I'm not going to argue too. I'm a huge
you
hater
hate
on just straight up
Frostlass.
Frostlass. Like now that Grimmsnarl is a thing, I'm a huge hater of just straight up Frostlass. I'm like, why would you play this version when you can just play Grimmsnarl and be a better deck,
I mean,
right?
sure, this is true. This is true.
I mean, it's the same thing of
It's a
why
different
would you play
strategy, though.
Dragapult? Why would you play Dragapult and Typhlosion when you can just play Dragapult, right? Like it's
I
one of
mean,
those things.
I
Um,
think it's a different strategy in my mind, because I'm just like, the Grimmsnarl deck is all about putting a lot of pressure on with 180 attacks
mhm.
and spreading damage. Whereas this one is like, I'm going to play a very slow game. Like, I'm going to sit
Yeah,
here.
I think it's just too slow.
I think you're probably right for NAIC, but I will say the format I played in this last weekend was Destined Rivals format. I went 2-2 with Frostlass at my locals. Granted, one of my matches was against my own Guardy, so rip to me. And then the other one was a donk. I just didn't draw anything. But I don't know. I think the deck is better than you're giving it credit for, but I don't think it's a good pick for NAIC. Net.
Yeah, I do find it interesting, and I would love to see because something that we've noticed through the different regionals that have been happening lately, especially like the Journey Together format, is we've seen a couple people play together both in like the Western format and also like through the Indonesia Master Ball League. We've seen Archaladon get paired with Zorark,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is cool. Um, Especially because maybe you do go in and you do some good stuff with the like dark energies. You can enable Zorark or you could enable Monkey Dory like more at that point. I don't know if you would do Monkey Dory, but just like trade is just so good. And like
It's true.
trade is sick. Especially for a deck that needs the energies in the discard pile. If you just get a couple Zorarks going, you'll get the energies in the discard pile for your abilities so easily. It's a free thing to put in.
Well, let's just talk about that. End Zoroark. Trade, we all know it's an amazing ability.
Mhm.
But I think End Zoroark is sort of plagued with this awkwardness of like, well, what am I attacking with? And right now, it's Darmanitan and Reshiram. And I don't think either of those get you there in this format.
It's really weird. I mean, I think Darmanitan is still a really good attacker. Or at least a really good Pokemon to copy an attack, even, right? Being able to do 90-90 somewhere can be really nice. And then even with other damage modifiers, like you could do other amounts of damage, especially when setting up, because you talk about all the baby Pokemon in format too, are all under 90, right? Especially as you talk about maybe Ralts, you talk about Cyndaquils, you talk about Impidimps, right? And Shaman in the format does hurt that, especially. So if as soon as you run into a Shaman, now you're like, okay, I need to boss it up. I need to hit big bodies. Whereas with Reshiram, right? Reshiram is a nice ability to copy because of powerful rage, but it's like you have to hope that you don't get one shot. And so Zoroark's success is really going to factor in of how much of the one shotting is there, how well can those setup decks like Grimmsnarl, how well can those other setup decks really hit you? I mean, we saw Lucas Zing and Liam Halliburton, right, at recent regionals playing End Zoroark, who are well-respected players in this game, right? And they did well at these events. I think Lucas Zing making top 32 and Liam Halliburton just bubbling out of that one. So yeah, I think it's tough with the introduction of Shaman because you lose that kind of spread potential, but I don't know if it's impossible.
I agree. I don't think it's impossible. I think the fact that they both introduced Shaman and Marnie's Grimmsnarl in the same set, which is you have Marnie's Grimmsnarl, which is going to do 30, and a card that can at least stop 30 of the damage that Marnie's Grimmsnarl is putting out. And, I think that most decks, especially ones that evolve, are going to be sitting there thinking, I got to play Shaman. So if I'm up against an End Zoroark deck, to me, like I sit there and I think to myself, okay, well, I got to get Shaman out early. And then you do. And then to your point, you have to boss. Okay, they boss it, they knock it out. Next turn, what do? Night Stretcher, get Shaman back, put it back. You know what I mean? Like
the thing about Zoroark as a spread deck is that it's tougher as a spread deck because you don't have typically you don't have Monkey Dory damage manipulation. You could potentially do that.
Yeah.
And you could maybe run that because we have seen through the different regionals that some players do actually play Monkey Dory. It is a card that appears in these deck lists. So is there more of a focus on Monkey Dory and stuff like that? Do you play do you try to go with the Team Rocket's bomb to be able to run in with the Monkey Dory? That's another question that you could have. So it's but again, it goes all back to that idea. And also, does it kind of stop the Frostlass decks a little bit, right? Do you kind of redirect damage in a sense that they try to do? It's really curious. I think Zoroark is the big question mark of the format, but I'm not overly high on it.
I'll put it and see. I think if you are planning to play Zoroark, I would urge you to at least look into a 1/1 line of Toadscroll. Because Shaman is going to be your worst nightmare. If you can knock it out and they can't put it back into their hand, that is going to be the difference between you winning and losing those games, I think. Because I think if the only attack that you can rely on that's any decent is Reshiram, I just don't think the deck wins a lot of games like that. So that would be my only advice is if you're going to have to put in the work to knock out the Shaman, at least make sure it can't come back. All right. Let's talk about EV Box. I played a lot of this.
The Flareon.
Yeah, the Flareon is what represents EV Box. I want to put EV Box in B tier. I think it is a very good deck. I think that It has the potential to even throw in something like a Leafeon, so it can hit weakness against things like Marnie's Grimmsnarl. Um, and your main attackers are Terra type, so they won't be hit for 30 on the bench. They don't have abilities, so they won't get Frostlast. So I think it has some benefits. I think that the Sylveon is just a crazy strong card in the format. Since so many of these decks that we're looking at here are evolutions in some sort. Imagine Marnie's Grimmsnarl likes to put out 1 or 2 monkeys, a Frostlass or 2, which really leaves you with just 2 Grimmsnarl lines. So if the Sylveon player can take a turn, boss, shuffle those back into the deck and get rid of their Spikemuth Stadium, that could be lights out for that player. But Jake, what do you think?
I think it's tough for Flareon. I mean, 280 is not a number to scoff at, right? With the Carnelian attack on there. And then also Burning Charge is just a good attack, right? It's a good setup attack. That's why Flareon is usually just like the main attacker. And talking kind of about the Leafeon, I think you really have to make a distinction of what tech evolution you want to throw in there, right? Because we saw at some of the recent regionals that happened at the end of the Journey Together format, some people were starting to put an Umbreon, right? Umbreon EX to be able to hit weakness on the Gardevoir, right? Because with Moon Mirage, you'd be able to take a one-hit knockout. Onyx, right, is a great like finish the game if you have one prize left, right? Because it's just like take a prize. So I feel like, because I think Angelite is a pretty good, I feel like the 2 ones that you do need to have are Flareon and Sylveon. So then it becomes, would you rather play the Umbreon or would you rather play the Leafeon? The Leafeon may have a nice attack, right? In Verdant Storm, doing 60 times for all the energy attached to your opponent's Pokemon. But if they know that Leafeon's coming, if you give them any indication of a grass energy or, like a Leafeon in general that you're setting up, they're just going to do what we've talked about and just not put a lot of energies on the field. Because if you're facing up against a Grimmsnarl, for example, you're using that as weakness against Grimmsnarl, right? That's why you use Leafeon, maybe Charizard as well. With those abilities, you don't have to accelerate a ton of energies. And so if there's only the minimum on those 2 specific Pokemon that you use the matchup for, right, that's 240 damage after weakness, which is not enough to be able to hit. And then Moss Agate
is crazy. That's why
it's pretty nice. Yeah, it's why you play the Leafeon probably, and it's probably really nice into Grimmsnarl because you then like you heal the 100 damage, you heal up a lot of this setup damage.
It's
because it's on each of your benched Pokemon. So as damage, as like damage is stacking up on your Noctowls, your Pheasantipity, maybe your Terapagos or Latias or something like that, you can heal a lot of that stuff off because 100 on everything is a ton. So in my mind, it's like you got to take Umbreon out. And how much does that affect your overall matchup spread if you're specifically wanting to just counter? Because, I mean, Gardevoir is still pretty good. I feel like we haven't put it anywhere yet, but I feel like Gardevoir is still good.
Gardevoir is good, but I will say Gardevoir's game plan to winning is not dissimilar from Grimmsnarl, which is they want to manipulate damage counters, but part of it is manipulating it such that they can be behind on prizes, use counter catcher, and win by taking a 3 or 4 prize turn, right? It's the same mentality. And a Leafeon that says heal 100 from all your bench means every bit of that setup damage that you're doing goes away, right? Like Noctowl, your Noctowl isn't going to get knocked out. It's fine. Now it's back to 100 HP. Any setup damage on your Sylveons or Flareons or whatever it's on the bench, like I think that Leafeon's second attack is backbreaking for decks that spend their whole game trying to like set up a 1-turn sort of end game situation.
And it does flow well with your deck already because Leafeon's energy requirement, for anyone who does not know on that attack, is grass, fire, water, which synergizes well with the Flareon because Flareon also needs fire, water. So again, like when I was talking about Umbreon, people would just run one dark energy. And so you can just switch two cards. You can switch the Umbreon and the dark energy to just a Leafeon and a grass energy to be able to fulfill that. And I think it would work out well with the deck because you're not typically playing Monkey Dory, right? To synergize also with that dark energy.
I don't know. My gut says I want to put it in B. I think the deck has potential.
I think B would be fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the deck has potential to be not just good, but better than it was in the previous format because like before it was like Sylveon doesn't hit anything for weakness that mattered. If you played Lily's Clefairy, I guess you hit Dragapult. But
I think you should play Lily's Clefairy.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
But like, so you can maybe hit Dragapult for weakness. Flareon doesn't really hit for weakness, but it's got a big attack, so great. But now that Leafeon saying, I'm not only going to hit one of the most popular decks for weakness, but I'm also going to stop entire game plans with one attack. I don't know. I don't think the deck will win the tournament, but I think people are going to be really excited to see Leafeon in one of the streamed games. Let's just say that.
I could see that. Yeah.
What deck do you want to talk about next?
I think we can mention Rocket's Mewtwo because I think this is a deck that a lot of people are interested. I would put this also in B tier. I kind of think of it as a similar level of Typhlosion in terms of power to where it's a good deck and it's consistent, but I feel like it's pretty linear. Oh, I have a cat hair in my mouth from bringing this mic from home. That was gross. But I think it's too easily counterable. And I just feel like you don't, I mean, you hit 280, which is like a really, really sick number, right? But you don't play Shaman more than likely. Maybe you should play Shaman. It's a weird spot. It's one step away from being a top tier deck. And maybe we just haven't found it yet, but I think it's fine to bring it into an event, but I don't think you should expect if you bring it into an event to win.
Yeah. I think if you play it, you do play Shaman because it is your matchup with Grimmsnarl, I think, goes up significantly if they can't easily knock out your Spidops on the bench. So I think Shaman is crucial there because, look, they're going to get Frostlass counters. They're going to move Monkey counters. They're going to try to get rid of your Spidops. I could see a turn where if you don't play Shaman, they boss one Spidops and then put damage counters and then knock out both of your Spidops in one turn. At which point, like, what are you doing? Your game is over if both of your Spidops get knocked out in a Mewtwo deck. Because, like, you can't accelerate energy anymore, and they're just going to keep knocking them out every turn with Monkey. So I think you do have to run Shaman for that reason alone. But I agree. I think somebody will find a version of this list that works really well. I think you can also play one of Lily's Clefairy for the Dragapult matchup, and you just don't put it down when Dragapult isn't your opponent, right?
Just easy discard fodder.
Right. It's fine, right? Like, so I think there's a few techs in here that help out certain matchups. And look, Mewtwo is huge. 280 HP as a basic. You could throw a Bravery Charm, put it at 330. Like,
it has some good numbers for sure.
I will say, don't underestimate that as like a way that you might win games, because we might also see, Jake, some people playing the Team Rocket's Mewtwo with cards like Professor Turo Scenario, knowing that, like, unless they're up against Marnie's Grimmsnarl, this Team Rocket's Mewtwo may not be one hit KO'd by anything in the format. So, I'll go over a couple of the more less common ones, and then we'll finish off with the ones that people are more familiar with. I think the Cynthia's Garchomp, I wanted to mention it. I think it is a D tier. I think it is, I don't know.
I think that's crazy that you think Frostlass is better than
I definitely
Garchomp.
think Garchomp.
That's insane.
Guess
That's
what?
an insane
Guess who wins
take.
that matchup? Frostlass. Frostlass bodies that Garchomp deck.
Okay.
It does. It does. You just
Sure, you may be right,
you
but
TM
in
Debo that
the
boy.
grand that you may be right. All right, I will give you that maybe Frostlass beats Garchomp, but two things. One, I'm not going to test that matchup because I don't care enough
That's
because
true.
it's not going to be as popular. And so then in two, if I lose to it, that's fine. If I have to lose to a matchup and
That's
that
true.
matchup is Frostlass Monkey Dory, I'll take that all day. I'll take that all day if it means that I could beat other matchups.
I worry that Garchomp. There's been other decks like this. Garchomp is catching all of the strays from Marnie's Grimmsnarl EX being the best deck in format because they're both weak to grass.
Oh yeah.
So that's my thought too. Is it's like Marnie's Grimmsnarl is amazing. People, we should find tech grass attackers. And then Garchomp is sitting over here like, guys, calm down. We don't have to. Come on now. I just think it's catching strays. That's all.
Yeah, I will agree that like a lot of times I feel like if you're tech to beating Grimmsnarl is weakness, then yeah, Garchomp kind of fills that same void. I just think it's crazy that you've put yeah.
Do you want to put it in C? Do you want to put
No, I don't want to put it in C. I think D is accurate. I just think Frostlass goes in D.
You know what, Jake? I'll put Frostlass in D. Just so
let's
that one of
go.
us
We
can
got
be
him
proven,
to cave. We
so
got
that-
him to cave, boys.
That way I can gloat. You see now, Jake, you can't gloat if you were right, but I can gloat.
Sure.
If I was...
Sure. Yeah.
Oh,
Frostlass goes from D to C. Gloat.
Yeah. So the next one I have on our list is the Terra Box. You wanted to throw this on the tier list, Jake. What case are you making for Terra Box?
So Terra Box, I feel like, is not a deck that's been like super overly successful, but when you talk about also now with the idea of Clefairy in there, right? Clefairy working with Ogerpon, working with the different Ogerpons like Teal Mask Ogerpon, Cornerstone Ogerpon, Wellspring Ogerpon, I think is still like in a relatively decent position, even though it's hard to pilot. I would put it in C though. Because I don't know. I feel like it's really situational to want to play in the format. And I think kind of what we saw in that Japan Championship when Tord and the crew that he was with played that and had success with it was just the best meta call at the time. And I think it's tried to live up to that hype ever since, but I don't think it's really met it. But we've seen kind of spurts of that success in the format.
Yeah, I think that the Wellspring Mask Ogerpon, it has two attacks. It has Sob, which traps something in the active, and it's got the torrential something pump, I think, that does 100 and 100, or is it 100 to the bench? I don't know, one of the two. Obviously, like the fear for a lot of decks prior to Shaman coming out was that second attack. Like they would trap you, they would take a turn, and then they would do 100 damage to one of your bench, and that can be pretty devastating. But I think Shaman is like impedes the deck a little bit. I'll also say Cornerstone Mask though, it can be in certain matchups really strong. Like think about if you put a Cornerstone Mask up in that Grimmsnarl matchup. Like what is Grimmsnarl doing?
Attacking with non-energy.
With Morgrim?
Yeah, with attacking with Morgrim and then Frostlass Monkey Dory stuff.
Just yeah, I mean,
to your point,
true.
it's not very good.
No, so,
I also have decided to move Terra Box to B.
Oh, you're moving
because I'm kind of think back to like a lot of the different regionals. And you had like Bologna, right? It was top 4 in that event. You had Portland, which it also had top 4 in of these Journey Together formats. In the different categories of like juniors and seniors, it's also done well at these different events. Even Utrecht, it got top 10. So I'm like looking at this and I'm like, maybe I still think it's a good deck. Like it's so flexible that even, you're right. Maybe the whatchamacallit, the Shaman does a little bit of damage to it. But how much HP does Shaman have? Is it 70 or is it 80?
HP.
It's 80. Okay, I was going to say like Fan Rotom provides problems against Shaman because of the extra or because of the 70 damage that it can put down, but I don't know. I feel like hmm, I feel really weird about Terravox because I feel like Terravox can make some noise. Because it's been one of the I feel like one of the more quieter decks of the Journey Together format, right? Because like I mentioned earlier, it was on such a high pedestal in that Japan Championship, and then it's slowly like kind of been down, but it still like had success in the
Yeah.
format. I don't know.
I think
I feel like it'll just continue.
I think it's fair to say that this format likely has a very large spread of decks in the middle in that B
Mhm.
tier that are like, yes, could somebody pilot this to a top 16? Probably. Is it likely to win? Probably not. But somebody could probably do very well with the deck if they are a good pilot and if they have the right matchups. Couple of other ones. I think we can go through these next two pretty quickly. I'll do Charizard EX first.
Mhm.
I think we saw that in Japan, this deck, and I've separated out from Dragapult, but like, say you do a primarily Charizard deck. I think this deck, is a B tier deck. And I'll also say that Dragapult is a B tier deck. I'm going to do these both at once.
You think Dragapult's a B tier deck?
I think Dragapult is solidly B tier.
Mm.
People love it. People play it all the time. The deck has consistently, in my opinion, underperformed.
I don't know if I would say it underperformed as it had a 25% meta share in the Journey Together format.
Yeah, it had a 25% meta
And
share. And
like I
what was
think
the meta share of its top eights or its wins?
well, I don't know, but it definitely had the most points. Had several top 8 finishes. It's not the winner of every event. Oh my gosh, I didn't even realize how much it dominated the SPE Durban. Which
Yeah.
is a smaller sized event, but still, like, I didn't realize they got first, second, fifth, and sixth. That's crazy.
It had
But
one SPE, I think, in the format where it went crazy. And
yeah,
then outside of that, though, I don't.
it gets a couple top eights. Does not win, but it gets a couple top eights. Oh no, the SPE that you're talking about is Utrecht.
Yeah, Utrecht, it went crazy. And I don't
Yeah,
know why everyone there collectively said we hate Gardevoir. Because I'm going to tell you right now, Gardevoir bodies Dragapult. And if the best deck in format bodies your deck, I think your deck is cooked.
well, here's to think. Do you think that Dragapult is a better play because Gardevoir's meta share goes down? Technically, with the introduction of
Magnus
Grimmsnarl?
Grimstall. I do think that there will be a not insignificant number of players who their play style, they like Gardevoir, and that Grimmsnarl offers similarities in play style. So I do think that fewer people will play it. I actually think that Gardevoir is still a really good deck. But
I
you
think
know,
Dragapult and Gardevoir are both the A tier.
I just I think
I'm
there
pretty
is
high
a
on like Dragapult.
I think
I
there's a
feel like
clear gap between Dragapult and Guardy in my mind.
interesting.
That's
Okay.
just because like Dragapult I think is having an identity crisis right now. I think that it doesn't know whether it wants to be Dragapult Monkey, Dragapult Dusknoir, Dragapult Charizard, Dragapult.
Isn't that kind of a high point though?
I
Because like you because opponents can expect one version, but then they get another version, and then you're already at a competitive advantage at that point because it's so flexible.
I mean, the card itself is flexible in that there's a lot of potential partners, but I would argue none of those partners make them A tier decks. I just like Dusknoir as an example. Look, we might be proved super wrong. I think giving up extra prizes right now is a horrific idea because things like Grimmsnarl and Gardevoir can just take so many extra prizes so easily that, like, uh, weirdly, a card that people wanted banned 3 or 4 months ago, I think is now not very good because you can't afford to put yourself at that much of a disadvantage.
I'm just really curious on Dusknor because we did not get the Psyduck promo, the
It's true.
Psyduck Japan Champion League promo that stops Dusknor's ability. Which is why Dragapult kind of teetered off a little bit in Japan because they have that promo, which is very easy to slot. But the West, we don't have that promo. So it's like I'm really curious on how Dragapult, specifically with Dusknoir, goes to see like what version of Dragapult is the most popular. Will we ever find that out? I'm not sure because I don't know if Pokemon, when they do their like meta spreads, really breaks it down that much.
Yeah.
They just kind of keep it general, I feel like a lot of times, but um I'm not gonna argue too much
I'll
because
put it in A.
I think okay.
Because I think that
I'm
I will say I think that there are 5 A tier decks. And I'm just gonna quickly jump ahead and just say that Gardevoir and Raging Bolt are the other two.
I would agree with that. I was gonna put Raging Bull in A. I like Raging Bull right now.
Yeah, I mean, just I know we sort of breezed over Charizard, but real quick, Charizard hits for weakness. I think it's a against Gardevoir. I think that like it's a pretty decent deck. It did well in Japan, but I don't know. I think it's also going to catch some strays from Marnie's Grimmsnarl because I think it's a better deck, and they're both weak to again grass. So it's a weird one where like everybody's pivoting to decks that counter Gardevoir, but the best deck that counters Gardevoir is Grimmsnarl. So every other deck kind of falls a little bit because of that, in my mind.
I think Charizard's a decent C tier.
Okay, I'm happy to move it to C. I don't want to fight too hard for Charizard.
Yeah, I think just the other decks that we got on that C tier, I think it's probably very similar to those. Especially because it feels like Charizard, the best thing that you can do is pair it up with like Dragapult.
Before we get into Guardy and Raging Bolt in depth, last one on our list is Roaring Moon EX. I know you probably like this is one you were thinking about. Where do you slot this and why?
Roaring Moon is really interesting to me because I feel like every time we have Roaring Moon like really low, Roaring Moon pops back up and says hello. It's a decent deck again. I feel like just the ability to knock anything out is really nice. Um and so like I don't know, like I feel pretty good. I feel pretty good on it, not like overly high. I feel like the highest that I would put it at is B.
Yeah.
It won the SPE and Bologna. Didn't really do too much through like Portland, Melbourne. It did okay. Utrecht, SPE did well again. Well, same person in Utrecht and
And Italy, yeah.
Bologna, Simon Tishan. Um, but anyways, I think Roaring Moon could kind of steal a scene as the deck that just can KO anything. Um, and also just the attack on it too, after getting rid of the stadium is still like a pretty good attack. And you run the poison package, so you have donk potential with all these like decks that start out with small bodies. You have, setup damage with the poison on the Brute Bonnet. So I feel like it's a pretty decent B tier deck.
You can play the baby Roaring Moon too as another single
Yeah.
prize option. Like, I think the hardest part about it is very matchup dependent on like, okay, when do I use the attack to auto KO? Because you do usually leave yourself with just 30 damage left, which is a very easy monkey kill.
Mhm.
So I think that's like the only part to me that I worry about in the format, but I don't know. It could be good.
Well, you also in the deck you run either ancient boosters, right? Because you just need
Sure.
one on the Brute Bonnet. So that's that. And you can also run different things like Bravery Charm or something to be able to boost up that. So you have a little bit more than 30,
Yeah.
right? If you're worried about Monkey Dory matchups, which I think you should, heading into this event.
Yeah.
Um, so I think I just feel like there's something there with Roaring Moon. Like I've never really been a Roaring Moon believer, I feel like. And maybe somebody on the podcast in the Discord will call me out. Be like, excuse me, Jank, you ranked Roaring Moon as the best deck in XYZ format. But I don't know. I feel like I'm a little higher than usual on Roaring Moon into this. I just have it's more so a gut feeling than anything, I think.
So we got 2 decks left to get into detail. We'll start with Raging Bolt.
Mhm.
I think seeing how well it did at Tricky Jim's tournament, seeing I think how well it did in a lot of the Limitless online tournaments, I think Raging Bolt is probably the best single prize deck, not single prize, basic deck in format.
Well, I was gonna
No,
say
you know what I mean.
it's not a single prize deck though,
I meant
Sean.
like my brain went like single prize, no evolution, and they crossed. So
It's the best beat stick deck,
yes,
right? It's the best hit big damage, knock out anything in front of me.
Yeah, it's definitely the strongest of those decks. Everything in your deck, for the most part, is basic Pokemon. I think everything in the deck is a basic Pokemon. I could be crazy, but
well, you run Noctowls, but
true. Yeah.
so but to your point, like in terms of possible attackers, they're basics, right? Like your Raging Bolt's a basic. You can play the baby Raging Bolt, which is a basic. Even the Slitherwing is a basic.
Yeah.
The Ogre-Pons, right? If you attack with those, Blood Moon or Ursaluna at the end, basic.
Yeah.
I think that Raging Bolt just, especially as the format goes wider, in a sense, I feel like Raging Bolt does a lot of great stuff.
You have the Ogre-Pon, which can hit for weakness on the Grimmsnarl, which is great. You have Raging Bolt, which can knock out anything. You can have, like you said, the baby Raging Bolt. And this, like you said, it's got a lot of options. I think it's well positioned in the meta. I wonder if people start throwing in Bravery Charms, because I've seen some lists that do play it and some lists that don't.
I think you should.
I'm personally a fan of it because even though you do hit the Grimmsnarls for weakness, it's not always guaranteed that they can't math their way into a 4-prize turn win, which is exactly what happened during the Full Grip Games one. So, it's not guaranteed that just because you hit for weakness. But yeah, I think the deck is really strong. It draws a lot of cards, and the fact that Fezandipity exists basically means that it's unlikely you'll ever get Iono'd into a hand that is unplayable. So, pretty good.
Yeah, I feel like I'm a changed man on this podcast because I've been kind of a Roaring Moon and Raging Bolt hater, and I'm like, you know what? I feel pretty good with both of them in this. I feel like I'm. Where is Jake? Where'd you put him?
I think the fact that the Teal Mask Ogre-Pon is now a valid attacker in the deck, I think bumps it way up for me. Because
I gotta remember what the damage output is for the Ogre-Pon.
You get 3 energy on it, and you're OHKOing a Grimmsnarl.
Okay, you OHKO and a Grimmsnarl with the 3 energy.
Yep.
I was gonna say I couldn't remember the output because that's 5 energy total. So is like that 5 enough? I couldn't remember the exact count, but I knew it was probably close. Yeah.
Yeah. And look, you probably can't get the Teal Mask powered up in one turn because you attach one for the effect, attach one for turn. So you might need an energy switch or an extra turn, but that's fine. You take that extra turn and attack with Raging Bolt first. So
there's also been Crispins that are running around in the Raging Bolt decks, right?
That's very true.
I think the list that we showed last week had an energy switch and also some Crispin, because Crispin is a great way to accelerate your game plan when Budu's running around, right?
Yeah.
Because energy switch doesn't work when Budu's item locking you.
It's also really strong early game before you get a bunch of energy in your discard, because you might have a Sada in hand and no energy in the discard, and you're like, oh, I can't do anything with this. So yeah. I think that the deck has gotten better because all of the attackers, all of the big Pokemon in the deck now have a viable target to attack. Whereas before it was it's all Raging Bolt or nothing is how the deck kind of felt. And so it was kind of like, well, if I knock out a couple of Raging Bolts and Iono you and you miss a Raging Bolt for whatever reason, then fine. I took care of that. Last deck, which is, I think, Gardevoir EX. You know that I'm big on this deck. I've been
big on the deck.
I think in Journey Together, it was a clear S tier deck. It won all but 2 major events in the format, which is insane. And now the question is, Marnie's Grimmsnarl is coming out. It hits the Gardevoir EX for weakness, and it also does a lot of the things that Gardevoir EX likes to do, which is Monkey Dory and it does Frostlass. So I think it's an A tier deck, but do you think that Gardevoir has met its match?
Well, here's the thing. I feel like the format is wide enough that Gardevoir can still be very successful. Like, sure, it might have gotten a worse matchup or a losing matchup with the introduction of Barney's Grimmsnarl. But I mean, we talk about in this A tier with no S tier thing. There's 5 decks in the A tier right now.
Yeah.
And there's other viable decks that we've talked about, like Flareon Box, like Typhlosion, like Mewtwo, and so I think the biggest thing that helps Gardevoir survive in this format is that you could go a whole run in this tournament without facing Grimmsnarl.
Yeah. True.
It might not be likely. You might face like 1 or 2 of them if you make it all 13 rounds or whatever. But that's still way better than what it could have been, if you're in if Grimmsnarl was considered like an S tier deck. Like, I think Grimmsnarl is pretty good, but I don't think it's good enough to like take over a format to where you're gonna play like 5 of them at least in a 13 round tournament. I think you're still relatively safe.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think Gardevoir, I look at this A tier and I'm like, I would feel fairly confident against Raging Bolt, Dragapult, and Joltik Box. If I got paired against any of them, I look at all the things below it and I'm like, some decks are a little harder than others, especially if they find all their pieces. But like generally speaking, most of these decks, I'm like, yeah, I could win. And so if I just have one matchup, even if it's really good, where I'm like Dragapult has one matchup in Gardevoir that I don't think is a very good matchup. I think it's a terrible matchup. And yet, Dragapult has still seen success. So I think the same will be said for Gardevoir. And I think it'll just be interesting to see like how people play that matchup of like, who do you Monkey Dory onto? How quickly can you get your Monkey Dories out? Are there any crazy techs that either side plays? I think that'll be interesting, I think, for me to see, like, because I don't necessarily know. I've seen people play against the matchup. I've played against it. I've both beaten Grimmsnarl and lost to it. So it's kind of like, because, your attackers are not actually evolutions in Gardevoir. So unless they're bossing up your Gardevoir, consistently getting an attack off every turn is much easier for Gardevoir than it is for Grimmsnarl, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So
I would agree with that. Yeah.
But Jake, how are you feeling about this tier list? You think this is
I feel like I feel like it's pretty fair.
Yeah.
I think we're honest with a couple things. There might be 1 or 2 that are too high or we're not taking too much into consideration. That could shift around. Like I did openly admit that I'm like Joltik Box, it's like it's scary for me to put an A. So that one, like if we go into the event and all of a sudden Joltik Box is just like it's non-existent. All right, putting it into B, like that's totally okay. Or like Flareon Box is 3 of the asymmetrical top 12, cut. Then I'm like, okay, maybe it is an A tier. So, but I think overall it's not bad. I don't think we're like overly off on anything here. But we'll just have to see.
I think the decks for me that are big question marks is going to be Enzoroark. I'm not sure there is a better version of that list, but like who knows? And then the Team Rocket stack, right? I think that's a deck that hasn't really seen the same level of success as maybe I and you expected when we saw the set review. But if anybody is going to cook up the perfect list, it's going to be one of these testing groups, like the Isaiah Bradners and Rahul Reddy type testing groups out there, or like the Brent Tonneson groups. Although I don't know if they'll even care. I think they might just be working on Marnie's Grimmsnarl, to be frank. So
yeah, I mean, it'll be really curious to see what comes out of this because again, NAIC will be the first thing of this format, and I think it's the only event because Worlds will be Black Bull White Flare, right? Yeah, so it's a one of format that, we really just have to go off of, online testing and things like that. So plenty of room to break open this format.
Jake, that is it for me.
That is it for the Menopause podcast. Thank you so much for listening to us. And again, let us know what you think is going to excel at NAIC, either in our Discord or on YouTube, and stuff the comments down below. And we'll see you in next week's episode. I'm Jake. That's Sean. Thanks for listening to the podcast that revolves around the evolving meta, and we'll see you soon.